I think we will kick off. Good morning to you all. I'm Sarah Dance. I'm Deputy Chair of the South East Local Enterprise Partnership, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's annual conference. Thank you to everyone for taking part. Thank you for all of those in attendance. If attendees could turn off your cameras, I think you have already. I can't see any of you on my screen anyway, and remain on mute. We're going to focus on our fantastic speakers, so thank you all. So the meeting is being recorded, and it is an open and public meeting, and the video will be available on the SELEP website and the YouTube channel post-event. We are going to have some questions at the end of the event, so if you can submit them through the Q&A function, and we'll do our best to answer them at the end of the session. And obviously, please note that the meeting will be followed by the South East Local Enterprise Partnership AGM at 11 AM. For anyone attending, we will share the joining instructions at the end of this session. So just before we begin and I hand over to the amazing speakers, let's make sure you're all awake this morning. So we're going to do a quick poll, and we would like to get a view from the audience today about which of the following represent the biggest opportunities for growth in the South East economy. So if you could answer that now, that would be fantastic. So Zoe, do the answers just come up on my screen? Is that how it works?
I think yeah, you just basically can see the same thing that we can see.
I can just see it all now. So that's really interesting. An even split between the development of key business sectors and managing major infrastructure projects and accelerating green technologies. These are all key things that I know we will be looking at a tiny bit today, but actually also that things that we will continue to look at as a SELEP. So just to kind of position the discussion a little bit, the reality is we are all facing really challenging and changing times for businesses, for our communities. And at the LEP, our role is really about bringing organisations together to champion the voice of business. And we really work to support our local economic sustainable development and to champion ambition and to seek out opportunities for our region. And we've got many routes to hear from and gather intelligence from our business and from our communities through our federated area boards, through our board members, through our working groups and our sector specialists involved in those discussions, and through the Growth Hub and our major projects and our extensive network of partners. And I believe this strategic network, alongside our detailed data repository, which we will continue to prioritise and invest in, gives us a really rich source of information and insight and underpins all of our collaborative, our partnership work. So we know in September 2022, the South East economy was in many regards in a really strong position coming into the current crisis, with record employment levels, record low unemployment, extremely high job vacancy rates, and economic output above pre-pandemic levels. However, and this is quite a big however, amid soaring costs and continued challenges in accessing materials and labour, business closures are exceeding business creations. And we know that the manufacturing, construction and transport and logistics are all impacted. And these are really, really important sectors for the South East. For manufacturing, 1 in 5 manufacturing companies believe energy costs will be an issue for 2 years. There are currently 93,000 live vacancies in the UK manufacturing sector, and total manufacturing investment is currently lower than it was in pre-pandemic 2019. Increased fuel prices, of course, mean spiralling transport costs, and producer import prices are currently at 24%, the highest since records began. International travel remains low and is continuing to impact on our ports and airports and their supply chains. And the construction sector continues to face acute shortages of skilled labour. So we're also concerned for the hospitality, leisure and culture sectors in the Southeast. I work in the creative sector. And the feedback is that this feels like the pandemic all over again, but actually without the levels of support that we had. Consumer confidence is undoubtedly low, and many consumers can't afford the additional spend, and the energy cost for these sectors can be really high. Many of them in the sector have called for cuts in business rate, in VAT, and even for potential furlough-style support. The FSB have shared their recent report on the impact of the energy crisis on SMEs, and 96% of small business owners are concerned about the rising energy costs. And the reality is the response for the SMEs has been a combination of reducing consumption, of price increases, and then scaled down plans for investment and expansion. So I know this sounds all pretty depressing, but the aim of today's event is to share insights, to learn from each other and consider the role we can play in the public and private sector to support our businesses and communities during these really challenging times. I fundamentally believe that we have a role to play and that we all have a role to play, and that together we must embrace the opportunities to shape our economic recovery and to provide resilience in our local communities. So as I said, today we're going to hear from some great speakers, including who are going to discuss the Southeast economy and our future plans and our opportunities. And I'm sure this will provide us with a range of different perspectives and that we'll hear what they believe that are the insights that are important for successful businesses in the future. I hope that their contributions will prompt us all to consider how we can act in the year ahead to support our region. So we want to offer an opportunity for questions, as I said, later, and please do upload questions into the Q&A section from now on, so please do so. So I'd like to now hand over to Mark Gladstone from CBI. I'm absolutely delighted to have you here. Thank you very much for coming. And we look forward to hearing your perspective today, Mark.
Thank you, Sarah, and hello, everyone. I think I've got some slides, Zoe. So in my
do you want to share them, or do you want me to do it?
Would you mind doing it, Zoe? And I'll do my best
yeah.
impression of Chris Whitty. So
absolutely fine. Just loading them up now.
And Sarah, thank you for that introduction. I think I might be in danger of repeating what you said, but I shall try and bring a bit of data to it, and also hopefully a little bit of positivity. And I also probably need to apologise in advance if you hear any dogs barking in the background. The office next to me has a Friday bring your dog to work day, which is mostly chaotic and quite noisy. And I've got somebody calling me. Let me just turn this off. Sorry about that.
Can you see that on the screen now?
I can. Do you want to put it in slideshow mode? That'd be great.
Yep. There you go. Perfect.
So we can go straight to the next one, actually. So just by way of introduction, for those that aren't familiar with the CBI, there's some information there, but the key fact there is that our members employ roughly a third of the private sector workforce. So we generally are the voice of business across the country and British business around the world. So next slide, please. Zoe, thank you. So, Sarah, in fear of not repeating too much of what you've just said, a quick reminder of where we are. So obviously COVID, probably the biggest crisis in peacetime. But as COVID started to wane, we did see a huge surge in demand driven by pent-up demand, as we've all experienced and as you've talked about it. And that has generated significant challenges, particularly for manufacturers and other sectors. In terms of supply chains, we're still seeing the impact of COVID on particularly supply chains from China, as their COVID zero policy still continues to be in place. And everyone's obviously talking about energy, and we'll come back to that, I'm sure. But it wasn't just the Ukraine war that started it. Gas prices started to rise last year, 2021. And another alarming stat is that since COVID, 1 million people have left the labour market. Not unemployed, just economically inactive for all sorts of reasons I'm sure you will have read about. Some areas of deep concern, actually, because a lot of that economically inactive population is long-term sick. So we definitely need to do something to address that. And yet, despite all of that, orders have been increasing for businesses. We've seen significant growth in businesses across the country, as well as the Southeast, as Sarah hinted at. And contrary to what people might think, consumer spend held up over the summer. However, what we did see, and it really started in Q1, was that business confidence, which had been on the up, had started to tail off. So as early as March, and probably related to the invasion of Ukraine. So we can go on to the next slide, please. So on this slide here, I've picked on 3 sectors, but obviously there's lots more. I'll start with hospitality and leisure, and I'm sure my next speaker, the Right Honourable Member for Hastings Rye, may have more to say on the hospitality and leisure sector. I've put it in here because obviously there's a lot of coastal communities and communities that rely on hospitality as a major sector and an employment sector and a driver of the economy. And that was the sector that was most impacted by COVID, and has, whilst we saw some recovery, it's really being impacted now, particularly on staffing shortages and cost pressures. And for many businesses, particularly the smaller end of the business scale, cash reserves, which had been damaged quite badly during COVID, haven't recovered. So that is a big concern for me. And as Sarah said, we do need to see some support perhaps for those sectors. It would be foolhardy really to have spent so much on furlough and other really great support schemes to let these companies just fall over now. But what we have seen in this sector is quite a big focus on how do we get customers out spending. But clearly we're now facing a bit of a cost of living crisis, and the fear is that consumer spending just drops. So perhaps that's something we can talk about later. I've put manufacturing and construction in there because the geography covered by the Southeast LEP has quite a significantly larger proportion of companies in this sector. So 1 in 4 companies are in manufacturing and construction across the LEP area versus 1 in 5 across the UK. And as Sarah already said, we've seen significant increases in input costs over the last 18 months, really. A lot of challenges for the sector in terms of staffing. The sector is facing what I call an aging workforce crisis. That's not anything to do with COVID. That's been hanging around for probably a decade. And we do need to address that. And I know the LEP have taken steps. How do we get more, particularly young people, into this sector? And I think there's a huge role in the future for companies to get involved in working with secondary education in particular. Away from the CBI, I'm involved in a governor of an engineering school, and we opened in 2016. And in that time, 100% of our young people have gone to positive destinations. And it's not because they're any brighter or better qualified, it's because employers are coming in, contextualizing the learning, making, why I'm sat here in a maths lesson, this is why it's important, because this is where we use it in the real world. And I think there's a really big role for employers to play on that. But some knock-on effects, actually, particularly in construction, we are seeing, particularly some of the larger infrastructure projects, starting to slow because it's very difficult for companies to price these things. I was talking to a manufacturer of steel that goes into the concrete, and the prices, the quotes they're giving have been valid for literally a week, 2 days in some cases, whereas previously it might have been a month, 2 months. That's the volatility that has been caused by the various challenges to supply chains. And I just wanted to touch briefly on interest rate rises, because I speak to manufacturers who, because of supply chain challenges, are having to stockpile and having to order in larger quantities to guarantee supply. So a company I was speaking to recently said normally they would hold 2 weeks worth of stock. Right now they're holding about 2 years worth, and they're having to dip into overdraft facilities, and of course costs are going up on that. Likewise, they've had to find more warehousing, and that's been quite a challenge since 2016, since the EU referendum. So quite a lot of cost challenges there. And the third sector I just wanted to focus briefly on was the agricultural sector, which often goes unreported, apart from the great work the NFU do to bring it back into profile. But that is a sector that has faced significant staffing challenges over post-COVID, but pre-COVID actually, since and largely impacted the seasonal workers scheme hasn't really delivered staffing at the levels that the sector needs. So that again is presenting challenges, particularly around food security and the cost of food, and that will impact everybody. So we can go to the next slide, please. So I was asked, what is it businesses need? And I've used this phrase quite a lot. I call it the 3 C's, which is clarity, certainty, and confidence. If we can give that to businesses, we will do what businesses do best, which is create profits, create jobs, grow the economy. But what do we need to make that happen? And where to start, given the current state of affairs? The first thing is we need inflation under control. We need market stability, and we need support for energy for businesses beyond the next 6 months. So there is a review in 3 months' time, but at the moment that isn't necessarily giving the clarity or the certainty, and therefore the confidence for businesses to invest. As Sarah said right at the beginning, we've seen a drop-off in business investment since in the last 18 months, but I would argue that that drop-off in investment has been an issue probably for the last decade. Infrastructure was mentioned. Absolutely, we need access to good infrastructure, and perhaps we'll come back to that. And smoother trade flows. We've all seen the issues at the particularly EU ports, but also at some of our deep sea ports, Harwich, for example. Lots of challenges moving goods into the country and out of the country. And a bit of a sweeping statement there, a pro-investment environment. I think that's absolutely essential for business to grow. So if we move to the next slide, and apologies, this next slide is quite a busy slide. So this is what we're calling for, and the top 2 are absolutely vital to make all the others happen. So restoration of market confidence. It's probably fair to say, without getting political, that the mini budget spooked the market. And I think what we need to see from government is, I've called it a credible medium-term fiscal plan. We need the OBR involved to give markets confidence that what is being offered will create the conditions for growth. Stability is absolutely essential to that. And then moving on from that, the big call from the CBI is around supply side measures. And again, these have been hinted at by government. We've got quite a lot of specific asks of the Treasury in their forthcoming budget. But smart taxation we're talking about. Businesses were quite disappointed to see the coming to the end of the super deduction allowance. I think that has helped create investment. I would argue perhaps it needs targeting on perhaps investment into technology that drives the green agenda. Again, perhaps we can discuss that. Business rates has been probably a challenge just about for, I've worked in economic policy for nearly 20 years, and business rates has been a regular conversation. It's a tax that taxes businesses before they make a profit, and it has it's not homogenous. The impact is felt certainly by some sectors more than others. Planning reform, again, it just takes too long to build things, and it creates uncertainty. I speak to developers that some areas of the country they just won't go there because it's just too difficult. Again, we need some more clarity on planning, and it's been talked about by governments for a number of years. We just need that sorting out. The apprenticeship levy, whilst brought in with good intentions, has had lots of consequences that weren't forecast. We speak to businesses that are putting people through level 5 apprenticeships, and I don't have a problem with that necessarily, but that's not what the reform was brought in to do. And what we have seen is a significant drop-off in intermediate level apprenticeships, the entry level apprenticeships. And for me, they were a huge driver of social mobility. And a lot of those pathways have been closed off to our young people. I think we need to address that and give more flexibility to allow firms to invest in staff development. Immigration, again, we're calling for an annual review of the shortage occupation list, the list which allows or says to firms, what sort of skills they can bring into the country. Again, we need a review of that, and we need to be very pragmatic. I've put childcare in there because that is a prohibitive cost for many, and I think we do need to look at how we reform and expand the current support. And the last, or the last on this slide, removal of trade barriers. We absolutely need to fix the Northern Ireland Protocol. It is still a problem, and it was very good to hear the feedback from Liz Truss's visit to Prague yesterday. I think, you know, we need to settle our differences and sort out trade with the EU. It remains our largest trading partner, but since Brexit came in, you know, we've seen a third of businesses trading with the EU stop trading, and again, we do need to address that. And again, we support the government's ambition for 2.5% growth. What I would add to that is this can only be achieved by powering up the regions. So the southeast, all of the regions outside of London. This is where the growth will come from if we're going to hit the 2.5% target. So if we can have the next slide, please. So again, what are we supporting specifically? And some examples here from the southeast, which I've included. So improving connectivity. We are supporters of the Lower Thames crossing, more links to Stansted. In fact, Matt Palmer, from Exec Director at the Lower Thames Crossing, spoke to our regional council recently. We're supportive of the Thames Freeport. Skills are, in all my time working in economic policy, I've yet to have a conversation with business where skills doesn't come up at some point. It's been there just about forever. So we absolutely need to do something about that. And the local skills improvement plans, if you're not familiar, is an opportunity. It came through the government's education white paper last year. In my previous role, I worked for one of the larger chambers of commerce, and I was very actively involved in working with government on LSIPs, as we call them. I think there are 3 for the southeast, and I would encourage all businesses, if you're not aware of them or you're not involved, do seek out information. I'm sure the LEP can help you with that. One of our big pushes, and it's the part of the CBI policy world that I head up, which is thriving regions, and I've talked about how do we get to that 2.5% growth. We're active supporters of devolution. We think actually regions know what's best for them, and so we are encouraging Whitehall and regions to get together and bring greater devolutionary powers to the regions, along with the funding that is needed to drive economic growth. There's some good evidence that you know, for every pound the public sector puts in, the private sector will come in with, you know, somewhere between £7 and £10. That's how we get the economy moving. Decarbonisation, a huge agenda. It was a huge agenda before COVID. It remains a huge agenda, but it also, I think, presents massive opportunities for intellectual property and export of products and services around the world. I'm working on a particular project at the moment in the Humber, which the World Economic Forum describes as one of 2 or 2 of the largest economic opportunities in the world. And one of them is right here in the UK. And actually we can learn from the work happening there. There are lots of other areas that we could grow this activity, which links very nicely to the next one, which is economic clusters. Again, we know clusters work. We just need to make sure that they've got the support needed and government understands how they work. Innovation, you know, despite the current challenges, I remain of the view that the UK is one of the most innovative countries in the world. We've got some fabulous universities. We've got some really great businesses investing in technology, growing, creating new opportunities. And we absolutely need to get right behind that and just show to the world, look, you know, if you want to invest, actually the UK, we led the world on the COVID response, the vaccine response. We can do this stuff. And then lastly, investment zones. And this is one of those areas of government policy, which is I describe as it's classic devil in the detail. Now, we are supportive in principle. What we wouldn't necessarily want to see is relocation of jobs. What we want to see is it can't be as a net zero sum game. We need it to be, you know, growing and creating new opportunities and investment and jobs. So that's where we are. If we go to I think the next one's my last slide, you'd be pleased to hear. So I think LEPs and the CBI, our ambitions are very broadly aligned. So my challenge back out is how can we help support each other's ambitions? I think we want what you want. So I'll stop there if that's okay. My contact details are on the next slide. Very happy to speak beyond this conversation, and you can find me on those details there, or find me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to connect. So I'll stop there, Zoe, if that's okay, and Sarah, and hand back.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mark. That was absolutely fascinating, and I couldn't agree more about being stronger together and working better together. I think that's going to be absolutely key. And I really kind of note some of the things that you were saying about the green agenda, about decarbonisation. Those were things that obviously came up in our poll just earlier on. And that idea of clusters and innovation, the idea of businesses working closely with HEFE and to address some of the skills agendas, all key things for us as SELEP that we continue to look at. So thank you very much. And just a reminder to everybody watching, we will have a Q&A at the end of the session. So thank you very much. I was now going to hand over to Sally Ann Hart, but I can't see her on the panelists at the moment. So do we know, Zoe, whether she's around yet or not?
We're just checking to see maybe she's joined as an attendee rather than a panelist. Just having a quick.
We'll just have a quick look, and if not, Jonathan, I'm going to hand over to you just to alert you that you'll be moved up the agenda somewhat whilst we wait for Sally Ann to join us. I hope that's going to be all right. Nothing like putting you on the spot. Okay, so I think that's what we'll do, if that's all right, unless you've seen her, Zoe.
Yeah, I'll just message her office as well.
Okay, brilliant. All right, we'll do that. So thank you. So now I'm going to hand over to Jonathan from Localis, which is an independent and leading a not-for-profit think tank focused on neo-localism. And it's absolutely, you look at how you can empower local areas to have more control and influence over their economic prosperity. So Jonathan is going to talk to us about the recent research they've undertaken on resetting the Southeast, and which investigates the role of the Southeast region in levelling up and what's necessary to deliver in order for us to deliver that. So thank you, Jonathan. I'm going to hand over to you.
Many thanks, Sarah. Many thanks, everyone, for joining. Well, yes, I'll talk through our report on levelling up the Southeast, but I thought it's been a week, hasn't it? Hence, I'm on the Lucasade already. It's party conference and everything. But you thought it'd be helpful, Sarah, just to frame it through that very necessary political bit of turbulence we've been having. If Liz Truss was bounding up the stage to the strains of moving on up by MP, and I'd suggest for businesses and growth bodies across the greater Southeast, search for the hero inside yourself. On the sense of self-reliance might be a more appropriate bit of mood music. So my main takeaway from the conference is, look, clearly the levelling up agenda continues. It's not dead. It's not pining for the fjords, as one of my fringe panelists suggested, but it's clearly different. The political commitment to it remains as a brand, but I think we have to factor in what this change of political leadership means. So when Michael Gove was unveiling it back in February, in that ancient time in this year, it's been the year too, hasn't it, before Putin invaded the Ukraine, that he encapsulated a very complex, very nuanced set of policy responses to the perennial productivity problem with a very well-reasoned, well-written analysis. And when he gave a private briefing at Number 10, he said, look, if in 3 words, levelling up is reducing geographic inequality, reducing geographic economic inequality. But we've got to move for the rail politic, and we have a new levelling up secretary in Simon Clarke, and a growth agenda. And this does mean pursuing a slightly different road, one that's all about overall national growth, baking a bigger pie, as said, and delivering those supply side changes to the economy to achieve all this. What's it going to mean? Is it going to presage yet another about turn in what's already been a very twisty-turny sort of planning policy shift since the Planning for the Future white paper all of 3 years ago? What does the follow the ball, chase to secure investment zones mean for those parts of the country that have been sort of chosen at short notice to express their interest? We had a very enjoyable panel with the Thames Estuary Growth Board on Monday with Paul Scully, the local government minister. Clearly, some parts of the country are going to thrive on this better, but what does this mean for economic distribution? So overall, I suggest what it means, if it's all about growing the pie, I think sort of we're moving towards a return to the economics of agglomeration, which were more, ironically enough, of the Osborne years, and moving back to aggregate productivity. So this in turn means less of a focus on, say, the town's agenda, because you can't do everything all at once. That kind of that agenda we had about after the Brexit vote, why were people voting for this, and people brushing up on their David Goodhart's Road to Somewhere about people's different political and economic affiliations. So we have a new political philosophy, a new growth plan. Probably less said about the growth plan we had unveiled 2 Fridays ago, the better. I think one thing I picked out that hasn't really maybe given enough interest is the promise to streamline over the next 2 years all those tournament financing cash pot bids which local authorities have to bid for to get sub-regional funding. I think that's that might be worth something over the longer term. So you might remember during the end of the leadership campaigns, Gove warned that Trussonomics might be a holiday from reality. But taking on the theme of fantasy for anyone who's been following Amazon Prime's Rings of Power, there's no chance of a fiscal forest or set of money trees rising up in the Shire like those sort of moving plants, trees, those Ents in Lord of the Rings. I remember during the Brexit years, some ministers were saying, well, look, we will give you the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. Who's to say we can't, in the sunlit uplands post-Brexit, double the money available for structural and economic redevelopment? Well, I don't think it worked out like that. Unless it, yet again, the spending review of last autumn probably did fall the levelling up agenda in terms of supporting the capital it needed to sing, dance and all the rest of it. Although in fairness, Gove as ever did a good sleight of hand in making it appear more than perhaps it really was. So in Michael Clarke, we've got a former local government devolution minister. We've also got a former chief secretary to the Treasury, so he understands if he wants to bring his insight and influence to bear for the sake of local government being a partner in a growth, that's all there. But I think on the other hand, we do have a further fiscal retrenchment to come in November the 23rd. And I think the impact for growth will be, in terms of local government's ability to deal with demand side services, especially the statutory services, this will impinge and restrict their ability to do other things that benefit or boost the public realm, whether it's high streets, town centres, all the rest of it. And what you can see is whatever was gained from last year's spending review for pro-growth schemes in local areas will have been more than eroded by the impact of inflation and supply chain issues further down the line. What can the sector do? I'll talk more about this in our report, Resetting the South East. Fiscal devolution is always kind of the thing we call for. One of the MPs we had at our panel on Levelling Up Birmingham, James Morris, a former Localis director, was making the point in his constituency of Halesoe and Rowley Regis in Birmingham. They've had to wait 6 years to get 19 million pledged funding from the dead hands of the Treasury. And from our perspective, we've looked at this for the LGA in Germany, the Netherlands and Switzerland. Pro-growth local yields don't lead to a race to the bottom, and fiscal devolution would be a great weapon for the local state to bear as the apex investor of place with all its powers. So the question is, how can we use, if the answer is we're self-regulating the economy to level up, to narrow entrenched regional and intra-regional economic inequalities, is that possible? For us, it possibly remains a moot point, but there isn't a lot of financial capital, as mentioned. There isn't a lot of time, maybe 18 months, 2 years, if they can eke that out to the next general election. And so what local government can do, and it's great as a partner for growth, will have to be wrapped up into the only game in town, which is the investment zones, gigabit broadband, and other business inducements of that type. So that's my sort of takeaway from conference. In terms of how this affects the Southeast specifically, it was at the outset of the, at the start of the year, it was made clear levelling up isn't about decapitating tall poppies, but it was also made clear that it involved in Gove's terms as levelling up secretary, channeling money up hills, upward fiscal irrigation. So we still need to know what this means in terms of shifting research and development spend away from what's seen as an overheated Southeast for the benefit of the rest of Britain. We put out our report for Southeast councils in March, resetting the Southeast, levelling up after Brexit, COVID and climate change. And our main point there was that the inherent strengths of the Southeast as a region, which is a net contributor to the exchequer and contributes to export living growth, is something that it's the baby that shouldn't be thrown out with the bathwater. And in terms of the ask we were calling for, a greater devolution of economic control, infrastructure investment, and transport coordination. The Southeast, and I think that Sally and Hart always maintains at our sessions, the disparities within the Southeast, especially in coastal areas, which are, in terms of the government's own metrics, as severe as anything going on anywhere else in the world. If we are going for growth, the Southeast will remain pivotal to spearheading export-led growth. And at the same time, the region has the abundant natural capital to deliver on net zero, energy security, and food security. However, the authorities that comprise it are hemmed in, restricted by financial restrictions, which leaves them unable to respond to the social supply side issues, demographic demands, growth challenges, and service pressures. So what we were calling for, not anything too radical, but a more nuanced devolution settlement for the Southeast, one that would empower local councils to alleviate deprivation, improve living standards through the prism of Pride in Place, one of the 12 levelling up missions. This has to start with local government finance, and we were holding a summit for the Southeast on the 19th of October at 1 Great George Street to look at the financial aspects as one of the key ones. Maybe the answer would be a Southeast Finance Commission along the lines of the London Finance Commission, which Boris Johnson oversaw when he was London Mayor. I talked about fiscal devolution in the continent, and there's ample room in what still remains surplus providing areas of the Southeast to raise funds for their own capital investment. They should be able to do so with the appropriate local leadership to raise additional levies to fund pro-growth investment. Using powers like those given to the London Mayor, Business Rates Supplements Acts, or tax increment financing for pro-growth schemes. And obviously it's going to have to be wrapped into a wider Devo settlement, one that goes with the grain of what Southeast leadership want, and the infrastructure for growth which you have here with the Southeast SELEP and all the rest of it. Final point is, transport. I think the unique challenge for the Southeast is how to coordinate its transport needs as much as its planning. We'll also have to see where the supply side demands to change planning and strategic planning take us. What is really politically acceptable given what happened in Chesham and Amersham? But really, transport for the Southeast should for our money, be made a statutory body, and with a focus on reforming the rail franchise system to improve physical as much as social mobility throughout the Southeast. So final words on this, Sarah. The Levelling Up White Paper made good reference to Medici era Florence, Renaissance. The Southeast has that potential to spark Renaissance across the UK, if not Renaissance, an upright, a risorgimento, an upwards sense of movement, unity across the country. And the Southeast must be seen as the pivotal flywheel, unlocking for strategic reasons for the entire nation through its mutual independencies with other regions. It shouldn't be seen to the Southeast on its own. So much of other regional growth is pivotal on supply chains, knowledge economy across the Southeast to deliver that. So we can hopefully get through the winter we're currently facing, and the Southeast should spearhead a springtime renaissance for our post-recovery era.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. That's really great to hear. And absolutely, I agree that the Southeast is at the core of some of our recovery, I believe, notwithstanding some of the challenges that you pointed out that we have in our coastal regions, which leads me on brilliantly, I hope, to hand over now to Sally Ann. Thank you very much for being able to join us. I know you also have other meetings you need to dash to, but I just wanted to welcome you to today's meeting, to thank you for very much for coming. For those who don't know, Sally Ann is the MP for Hastings and Rye, and she's been a really excellent supporter of the local enterprise partnerships. And I hope you really recognise the important role that the voice of businesses have in shaping regional policy. So I'm going to hand over to you now, Sally. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Sarah. And I'm really sorry that I had a bit of a panic getting on as the link didn't work, but I'm here now. And absolutely, the role of businesses in partnership working for local regions and levelling up is absolutely vital. But good morning, everyone. And I thank SELEP for inviting me to address you all today at their AGM. And I chair the all-party parliamentary group for South East England, for South East councils, and also the APPG for coastal communities. So obviously it's something that I'm very keen on, to ensure that the South East doesn't get left behind in levelling up, and that coastal communities particularly, we should be looking at them as a resource with loads of opportunities that we've got to grab, rather than a solution to solve there. So in July this year, following extensive evidence gatherings, the All-Party Parliamentary Group for the South East has published its report following the inquiry, which was Financing the Future, and what does levelling up mean for the South East? And the report outlines the concerns amongst local government and business groups in the South East that the levelling up agenda presents a major risk to the region in its current form. And whether levelling up under the new administration will continue in the same way, competitive funding pots, for example, is something I don't know yet. The use of competitive funding pots was criticised in the report, as it pits often more deprived areas against each other for funding and takes up too much resource to even make the application for many local authorities. And I think that's a really valid point that it raised there. Having said all that, we do know that the new government remains committed to the levelling up, and to this end it will be bringing in these new investment zones, and I really look forward to hearing more about that as we move forward. The South East, as we know, is one of only 3 regions in the UK who is a net contributor to the Treasury, which means that levelling up the South East is a vital part of levelling up the whole country. And the APBG inquiry, which was done with that report that was produced, received substantial written and oral evidence. And it is clear that whilst the South East is affluent, on the whole, there are parts which are very much in need of levelling up, like my beautiful constituency of Hastings and Rye. Coastal communities in particular have long been overlooked, and rather than manage their decline, we should be seizing the opportunities that coastal towns and villages in particular have to offer, including opportunities for renewable energy and ecotourism, to name a couple of growing sectors. Our coastal communities, if given the right focus, support and investment, will become a resource to the UK rather than a problem to solve or even ignore. So one key finding of the inquiry found that levelling up agenda has not fairly considered inequalities within regions, pockets of deprivation, and the higher than average cost of living in the South East. Concerns were raised about further centralisation and that meaningful devolution could be a key solution to end the financial inconsistency that makes it difficult for local authorities to plan for the future and develop far-reaching strategic regeneration or other economic growth plans. However, it was clear that metro mayors are a no-no in the South East, and you can't compare us here with places like Manchester or Birmingham. A recommendation for councils to raise tourism tax, for example, or more flexibility as regards business rates would certainly help local communities such as Camber in my patch or Margate. And it would help them thrive, being able to provide beyond the statutory provision that local authorities are constrained to provide. We have, for example, thousands of visitors to Camber Beach every year for 15 days of the year. It's like having a football match at Wembley Stadium. And if you think of all the police, for example, that are there to police those masses of people descending on one patch, we have a fraction of that. So businesses also voiced their concerns that they felt a lack of support from politicians. And I think that's a point that many of us, and me included, must need to really carefully think about. How do we give businesses more support? In a nutshell, there were 4 recommendations made in the report to ensure that levelling up benefits every part of the UK. Firstly, that levelling up shouldn't be about the North versus the South and must not come at the price of levelling down the South East. To be truly effective, levelling up must build on place strengths with a renewed focus on skills and business-driven economic clusters. And I think that's really important because as the chair of the APPG for coastal communities, I really am pushing for a coastal minister, a national strategy for coastal communities, and a cross-government departmental task force to focus on coastal communities. Coastal communities have a lot of common factors affecting them, but each place is separate and it has its own strengths. So you need to build a sense of place and maximise on the individual strengths of each particular town or area. Also, one of the recommendations was that higher levels of devolved powers should not require further centralisation and directly elected mayors where it's not desired. And I touched on that, is that it's really not something that people in the South East are keen to see in our region. And lastly, levelling up must address the ultimate issue of local government finance in the short and long term, with an emphasis on certainty and flexibility, so that rather than funding pots and having to a plan to do something for a particular funding pot, we need to have more long-term planning so that actually a longer-term view and planning can be done, and that would benefit everyone. This brings me on to the new growth plan recently announced and how levelling up in the South East interacts with this. And the key message in the growth plan is getting the economy growing, which will lead to higher wages, greater opportunities, and long-term sustainable funding for public services. I know that I think I came in when Jonathan was talking about supply side reforms, and in order to boost that growth plan, we've seen some of the tax reductions and the energy bill cuts for supply side reforms. I would expect to see some really ambitious other supply side reforms in order to really ramp up economic growth, and there's no reason why we can't see that in the southeast. And I think that is extremely important in bringing the announcements and the plans forward earlier than the 25th of November or the 23rd of November, because people need to know what's going on. And I think that's really important to settle people, and so that they know exactly what's going on. One vital aspect of the growth plan is the promise to deliver better infrastructure. And we know that by building infrastructure like roads, railways and broadband more quickly, we can ramp up economic growth, which is why we need to take action to unlock private investment and cut red tape. Investment zones, as we've heard, has generated a huge amount of flack, the deregulation, from environmental groups. I understand that. But I think the policy hasn't been clearly explained, and we haven't preempted the anxieties that people have raised about environmental protection, which are all embedded in our Environment Act. And I think it's really important to say that economic growth and looking after the environment are not mutually exclusive. And Britain has some of the best environmental policies in all countries in Europe. I do think the investment zones will provide exciting opportunities across the UK and drive growth. Investment zones are clearly defined areas which will drive growth and unlock new housing by liberalising planning, offering tax incentives and giving wider support to local economies that have been left behind for far too long. So I'm really looking forward to hearing about those investment zones in the southeast, and it's up to local upper tier authorities to register their interest in those now before the 14th of October. So I would expect, and I know SELEP, we had that debate in Westminster Hall about the role of SELEP. I would expect local enterprise partnerships to be involved in these investment zones. And I think that has to go. Partnership working is clearly the most important thing we can do to maximise all the opportunities for levelling up. I can't deny that the past few months have been difficult and turbulent, but together working in partnership, we can and we must grab all the opportunities available to ensure that the South East remains a leading region of the UK and further contributes to the Treasury coffers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sally-Ann. It really fascinating to hear some of your thoughts, and absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more about the importance of partnership working. And as you know, at the LEP, we have a coastal communities working group, which absolutely looks at some of the things that you've been talking about. So thank you for that. I believe, sadly, that you have to go off to a constituency commitment, so you aren't able to join us for the questions and answers at the end. But I know that we will try to pass any particular questions on to you, and get back to people on them. So thank you so much for coming, and sorry for all the technical difficulties, but thank you very much. It's been great to have you here. So thank you. Now I'm going to hand over to Adam, who is the Chief Executive of the LEP. It's always a delight to hear from Adam and to work with him so closely. So Adam, please, thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us. Thanks in particular to the folks who have spoken so far, to Mark, Jonathan and Sally-Ann. Really excited to hear from Matt and Martin after me as well. Given the importance of the external speakers, of course, I won't speak for very long. We'll cover quite a lot of detail in our AGM after this about some of the things that we've done as a LEP. But really my job now is to give you some of the highlights, which I absolutely will. And we continue to be proud of what we do as an organisation, despite some of the turbulence, I think, that, that Sally-Ann referenced a few minutes ago. So obviously, as is reported in the annual report, there are a long list of things that I could talk about. I think one of the things that that we're particularly proud of over the course of the 2021-22 financial year that the annual report refers back to is the delivery of the COVID recovery funds. So we were able to repurpose just shy of £4 million worth of our Growing Places fund to really invest in skills and invest in business support programs specific to supporting businesses deal with the worst impacts of COVID, and individuals as well. The Business Support Fund supported more than 300 businesses, provided close to 700 hours of one-to-one support, and enabled a further £400,000 package of support funding to businesses in the area, which was really well received, and a fantastic example of us having really iterated as an organisation over that 10-year period, and had more of a direct impact on a small handful of businesses. The skills element of that fund engaged with more than 1,000 people, invested in more than 100 pieces of digital equipment, and really did a lot to help support people in developing digital skills as have become so much more important post-COVID as well. What we've done more generally around skills has continued to have an impact. So during that particular financial year, we had a virtual careers fair some months ago now, which the Right Honourable Robert Halfon MP hosted for us, and we've played a role, a key role, I think, in helping develop the local skills improvement plans in Kent, East Sussex, and also now in Essex as well, to really take forward that latest bit of policy to support, what is the element of the economic growth agenda that underpins the rest of it. The most exciting area of work for us at the moment is the major projects group, and I think hopefully it'll be talked about a little bit more over the course of the next half an hour by other people. But that's really the opportunity that we take to bring together those big infrastructure investors in our area, such as Lower Thames Crossing, such as the garden communities, and other big things that are happening, to really have a conversation around the skills requirements, construction skills, around supply chain development, and understand and map out the future shape of the impact of those investments in the area, but what we can do as a regional body to better organise to support them. We produced a skills and employment report for those major projects back in November, which I think has been a big piece of work to map out exactly that. The strategy that we are working to at the moment, our recovery and renewal strategy, remains as our guiding light in terms of putting the right emphasis on what we do as an organisation, and that's around business resilience. It's around the USP of the area, which of course is that of being the global gateway to the UK, and really having a focus on our communities. And Sally Ann's talked about coastal communities to an extent already, and really understanding the opportunities and challenges across the coastal part of our LEP is something that remains really important to us in terms of sort of helping guide the investments that we make, and obviously the interventions that we make on a strategic basis as well. One of the things that we've been able to do over the last couple of years in particular is really enhance what we do around data, and the sort of understanding of where the economy is across the area is very specific and accurate, and I think lends a lot of credibility to what we've done in terms of some of that strategy work and some of the interventions that we've tried to help to support in the coastal areas of the LEP in particular. Thinking about levelling up specifically, we've done a piece of work with the Arts Council over the course of the last year, which has been around sharing best practice around how cultural and creative sector can play a leading role in revitalising the high street. That report provided case study examples and a toolkit for local partners to implement at local level. It's been really well received, picked up very strongly by a range of local partners, and it was a real pleasure to have the opportunity to work with the Arts Council in that respect as well. We've obviously continued to maintain that direct impact on small businesses, predominantly through the Growth Hub, and that kind of one-stop shop for business support that we organise in much the same way as we organise the LEP. So the delivery of that is very much determined at a local level, albeit the sort of strategic lead for it is provided by the LEP, but absolutely it's tailored to the more local areas. In more recently, we've faced a little bit of challenge with that because, of course, the funding for growth hubs has reduced, but the delivery of the services has been maintained, and some of the most passionate delivery of our body of work is done through that route. You know, those connections through business navigators to businesses, in helping them to understand how to grow and survive, is probably the most meaningful element of what we're able to do as a LEP. I've already mentioned the importance of improved data and the management of that. I think that there are probably two particular challenges for us now as we look to what comes in the future. One is making sure that we're in a good position to complete the task that we were initially set. So what we've seen over the course of the last 10 years is obviously a good deal of capital funding run through the LEP. And I think when you add everything together with the European funding, some of the revenue funding, the loan funding, local growth funding, particularly getting building fund, etc., you know, we've been able to administer the best part of 800 million pounds worth of money into the area. Those programs are coming to the end, and obviously the good administration of that remains really important, and to make sure that all of that money that's come through is able to have an impact on growing the economy, particularly now for the reasons that Sarah mentioned at the beginning. The next thing is really ensuring that we're able to make the change that we need to make as an organisation. So obviously from a policy perspective, one of the important things that's happened over the course of the last year has been the publication of the Levelling Up White Paper, and everything in that demands a transition to new arrangements, to a set of arrangements that are geared around county areas and upper tier authority areas, and that conversation is one that we need to inform. You know, there's a whole body of expertise that the LEP's developed over the last decade that sits in the team in different ways, and I think really, you know, when you consider that the LEP's key role is really to bring the influence of business into some of the decisions that are made in terms of determining how public funding is used to support growth, then we need to make sure at the very least that you know, that business voice is retained, and it's a feature of what happens in the future. So important for us in terms of determining the future direction of everything is to make sure that we're able to bring those lessons to bear on all of those conversations and help colleagues chart the best possible way forward for the area. It just really remains for me to say that, you know, we'll continue to work really hard to deploy everything that we have at our disposal to make sure that we position the local area in as best position as we possibly can. Importantly, working with all local partners in doing that, and rising to the not insignificant challenges that I think we've continued to have been posed over the course of the last 6, 12, 18 months. So Sarah, I don't intend to say more than that at this juncture, or when we've got some external speakers who can bring some really valuable, you know, specifics to the conversation. Happy to take questions at the end, obviously, and I'm grateful again to everybody for joining us this morning and supporting us more generally.
Thank you, Adam. And I'd also like to pay tribute to you and to all of the staff team who've done incredible work during what is really challenging times. And I know that devolution, you know, presents some challenges, but I think it also absolutely presents some opportunities for the LEP, and ensuring that we get that business voice front and centre of some of the conversations going forwards, I think is going to be really important. And that idea of collaboration working across all of our projects. So talking about collaboration, I'd like to now hand over to Matt and to Martin. Matt first is going to talk about the Lower Thames crossing and give us a bit of a view about the planned projects, the opportunities that they offer for our economy. So they are really significant projects, both of them. So thank you both so much for being here. Matt, if I can hand over to you first.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Thank you for inviting me along. Martin and I often do a double act, so normally Martin goes first. So I'm delighted that I get to go ahead of the Freeport, and I'm here to talk to you about Lower Thames Crossing. Just to introduce myself, I'm Matt Palmer. I'm the National Highways Exec Director who looks after the Lower Thames Crossing. And I've got some slides, hopefully that will come up. There we go. That looks good. So I know that if I speak for too long, you won't get Martin in the time frame. So I will go quickly. So if we just go to the next slide, please. So Lower Thames Crossing, for those of you that don't know what we are essentially a Dartford relief road, for want of a better term. But if you take the LEP area in the southeast, clearly Dartford is a significant block between Kent and Essex. It blights not only the estuary, but sort of the flow of traffic from Dover and the Eurotunnel up to the north. It also blights the sort of area around the Freeport and the Thames estuary, and Martin will talk more about the Freeport. So Lower Thames Crossing is the solution for that. I think the thing that is worth pointing out about sort of our area and our region, 70% of all the goods that come through across the channel, either into Dover or into the Eurotunnel, go over the Dartford Crossing. Dartford Crossing has been busy all the way through the pandemic, so we saw everything else drop, 10 or 15% on the motorways. Dartford has continued to be busy all the way through, and post-pandemic, what we're seeing is a massive return. But interestingly enough, we're seeing more HGVs and more goods vehicles going across Dartford than ever before. So Dartford runs 3 times more freight than any other part of the road network. So it's a vital link that needs to be solved. And my team have drawn this fantastic wiggly line on the diagram that sort of shows you where the new Lower Thames Crossing goes. I won't read the slides out. You can presumably read those. So if we go to the next slide, so that's what we're doing. And hopefully this will go to, yeah, great. So the timeframes of what we're doing is we've been around for a while. I mean, the crossing's been talked about since 2010. And realistically, we are still in the planning phase, but we're about to submit our DCO very soon, which will mean we get into construction realistically in 24, with the major works really starting in 25, and we deliver at the end of the decade. Now, what that does for the region, the LEP region, is it unlocks what is the most constrained road network in the country. We are the worst traffic jam northbound going through the Dartford Crossing in the country. And it unlocks all of that economic potential, whether that be for housing or for jobs. At the moment, only 0.1% of the population actually commute across the river. And so what you suddenly see when we put in essentially a double the amount of crossing capacity, that springs up massively, allowing the economies of Kent and Essex to join better together and allowing less friction on movement of goods, etc. So that's sort of the timeline, and we're I mean, it's probably worth just saying, clearly we're a national highways project, therefore our sponsoring department is Department for Transport. This government, last government, are very keen on this project. Clearly, I hope the next government will be, whenever that is. But at the moment, we've got very, very strong government support, both directly from Secretary of State in DfT, but also from Treasury. Keep moving to the next slide. So through the summer, some of you might have noticed this. I hope you have. We have, the reason Dartford is bad at the moment is it's 60 years old. It's designed for a different paradigm. And we've been running a campaign basically through the summer trying to get across the strategic message of why we need to do the project, which has resonated well with government and resonated well with local businesses, etc. And if you live, as I do, and commute over the crossing on a regular basis, I think people understand the real issue. I suppose the reason we are sort of pushing it, we want to make sure as a big mega program, it's very clear as what we're doing. HS2 did its thing around time and capacity, and it got a bit confused. For us, it's very simple. We're here to unlock crossing capacity across the Thames and to alleviate Dartford, which unlocks so much. I suppose the key, and this is really what talking about the sort of what Adam's been mentioning about the LEP. What that brings with it then is that when we construct this project, we will employ up to about 20,000 people. Martin will talk about similar numbers, I would imagine, in the Freeport. The skills we need for that and the coordination of that. The Major Projects Group in the LEP has been brilliant in allowing us to access those conversations, and long may that conversation continue. We were delighted to host them here in our offices earlier in the year, and we'll continue to support very much the activities of the LEP around the Major Projects Group, because it's so vital that us and all the other new big infrastructure projects or big changing influences in the area come together and talk about skills. We were about to, and we were going to have a slide, but I think it's dropped from the pack. We were about to launch our skills strategy, which kind of starts to show the direction of travel. And we see the LEP as a massive, important part. We're working with Zoe, etc., on it to try and ensure that we end up building long-term complementary skills that will feature not only in our project, but in other people's projects and businesses in the area. So how do we do that, in a complementary way? And then I suppose the last thing I wanted to say, and I think there is a slide, maybe just go to the last slide, is just around the importance on environmental, we're missing a slide, don't worry. The importance of environmental and sustainability in our mindset on the Lower Thames Crossing is that we are trying to ensure that we deliver the greenest road that National Highways has ever done. And that's really having a laser focus on both carbon and minimising carbon in construction and leaving a skills base of low carbon construction. And the second part is ensuring that we focus on nature and sustainability. And we've got huge numbers of opportunities that we are working across both those spaces. I think that was all I was going to say, because I know Martin's got probably a similar conversation he's about to do.
Thank you so much, Matt, and it is a pleasure. We enjoy working with you on projects such as this, and I think, hopefully this shows the importance of and the power of the partnership of the LEP. By working with people like you and with Martin, hopefully we can really unlock the benefits of these projects for the South East as a whole. So thank you very much. There will be questions at the end possibly, but now let me hand over to Martin. Martin, it's a real pleasure to have you here with us today to talk about the Freeport. So thank you very much.
Sarah, thanks very much, and pleasure to be here. For those that don't know me, I'm Martin Whiteley and I'm the Chief Executive of Thames Freeport. So I was going to say a few words just to recap on exactly what the Freeport is, and then a little bit about what we're doing moving forward, and to reinforce the points that have been made about the importance of collaboration across the major programs that are underway in the South East at this moment in time. I think not only are we at a point where we've got huge demands on individual programs, the collective pressure on the South East to deliver them is going to be significant, and we won't be successful if we don't find the right points where we can combine and be more efficient and effective as a result of that. But let me say a little bit about the Freeport, if we could move to the next slide. So in its simplistic terms, the Thames Freeport comprises of 3 tax sites, which are at London Gateway, a site owned by DP World, at the Port of Tilbury, owned by Forth Ports, and at Dagenham, where Ford have their engine plant. And those 3 tax sites were approved in November last year, and they make up the core of the current Freeport proposition. The outer boundary of the Freeport comprises of 3 local authorities: Thurrock, the London boroughs of Havering and Barking and Dagenham. And so we have a private sector led proposition supported by 3 councils and other major stakeholders in the area, including SELEP, including the Port of London Authority, and so on. So it's a partnership that has absolute focus about its location and the way in which it combines with its partners. But it also has clarity about the areas of focus in terms of the sectors that we see developing in and around those sites, and the clusters that can come as a consequence. If we can go to the next slide. So the free port is big. I mean, it has 1,700 acres of land. It's in a great location. We are really excited about the potential for renewable energy. We have a simple task, which is to attract foreign business predominantly into the land that is available, where they don't have a presence in either the UK or Europe. But by coming into the land that's available and to take advantage of the tax incentives that are available on those sites, that will support us with some significant economic impacts around improving jobs that are available to local residents and delivering on regeneration. It will allow us to create 21,000 plus new jobs, and it will act as a catalyst for lifting areas that haven't previously benefited from the prosperity created in the ports to a new place. If we could go to the next slide. So the free port is focused on 3 key sectors: advanced manufacturing, logistics, and the clean energy and circular economies. And I think what's really quite notable about this position is first of all, that an important pivot in the strategy for the free port is to shift from logistics into more added value processing and manufacturing activities, as we see our time through the next decade or so, because that's where the real opportunities lie. So we are indeed creating more infrastructure to create additional capacity in the ports, but we want to align that with added value that can be created within close proximity to the port and on the land that is available. So first of all, we have a really clear economic strategy. And secondly, what we're determined to do is to not only maintain that focus on those sectors, but also to make sure that we put in place safeguards that mean that we don't create disbursement across the area and indeed across the UK. So we've been at pains to develop some quite stringent processes that we think mean that not only do we safeguard the position in itself, but if for whatever reason a situation were to arise that meant there was a good commercial decision for a business to come into the Freeport land that didn't meet the investment criteria, then there would be clawback arrangements to ensure that we protect the tax incentives and that therefore they are not granted to businesses that don't fit the type of activity that we're seeking to attract. And we can go to the next slide. So for those that have been following free ports, the government and indeed the partners involved in it have put innovation as a central feature. And I think what I wanted to stress is that our approach is not to move straight away to a model of creating some form of innovation hub or other central point of build it and they will come, but to actually focus first of all on some initiatives that demonstrate that we can deliver on innovation and then use those as a mechanism for actually creating an ecosystem of innovation that sits behind it. So there are three big areas that we're looking to develop along with and collaborate with partners along the estuary. So the first is to explore how we can rapidly introduce future fuel hubs in each of the tax sites so that they're capable of supporting multi-fuels, multi-end users, and help in particular to decarbonize the port and the surrounding area. Secondly, working with colleagues in the Thames estuary, and the Port of London Authority, we see significant opportunities to take goods that come into the ports in large containers and to add value to those goods and to turn them into smaller light freight packages and to, in effect, utilize the jetties that exist in London and move the goods back onto the river, off the roads, and onto autonomous hydrogen-powered barges, thereby alleviating much of the congestion of traffic into London, and also supporting the move of the London markets from the centre of London into the Barking area. And finally, we see some significant opportunities to bring new technologies across the whole of the Freeport area, not least anchored through a new data centre that we want to support in one of the London boroughs. If we go to the next slide. And just as Matt has referred to, labour supply and skills is probably the highest risk issue that we have. 21,000 jobs in a 10-year period, the Lower Thames Crossing seeking a similar number, and other initiatives too, all combine to an existing situation. So working together on our skills programs and thinking about the different types of intervention that we can make, not just on our own, but in a coordinated fashion, becomes probably one of the most important issues in front of us all. And if we can go to the next slide. And so Matt referred to it, the working that we have across our major projects, I think is invaluable, and we really support that. And there are many opportunities for us to develop this out in terms of the way that we work alongside in the Freeport local businesses, not least around the areas that are identified here. But we look forward to continuing with that work and to develop the strategies and the proposals, and to get an engagement with businesses in how best to do this. Because I think one of the mistakes that we could make is to design the answers to these without co-working with businesses so that they are truly aligned to the way in which business operates and supports them in the most effective way. And that's all I was going to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. Really fascinating to hear, and we will watch the development of the Freeport and hopefully continue to work with you closely on ways to help unlock some of those agendas that you mentioned, particularly skills being one of the areas that I know we continue to work on very hard. So thank you to all of our speakers. It has been fantastic. We are now going to go to a question and answer session. I'm going to try and so if all of the panel could turn on your cameras, that would be great. I'm going to try and filter some of those questions as best I can, but if there are ones particularly that you want to answer, do let me know. But I just wanted to start with a bit more of a kind of general question. And maybe I'll sort of come to you, Jonathan, about this, which is we've heard throughout the session about some of the real challenges and indeed some of the opportunities that we have in the Southeast. What would you say you think are the sort of the biggest challenges that we face in the Southeast, and how as SELEP do you think we should be working to address some of those challenges and some of the opportunities?
Takes a pick, don't you? For me, I think the one hurtling closest with greatest rapidity is the whole issue of planning, trying to deal with the intentionality of what government wants with the realities of what local authorities and developers want to, how this feeds into growth, and how feasible any of this is. So I think so all feeds into each other. You can't have proper planning without an understanding of what the devolution settlement, without an understanding of the underlying public service financial settlements. So I think that's the key one, because it seems to pierce so many issues at once. Beyond that, clearly, it's, as with everything at the moment, the skills agenda, and supply chain issues predominantly, but that's what I see as being most politically and economically touchy at the moment.
Thank you, Adam.
Thanks, Sarah. Just to pick up on something that Jonathan just said, and actually reflecting back on one of the questions. So I've had a question from Stephen Robinson around planning and supporting planning officers generally, and planning fees, and making sure that side of things is as well resourced as it can be. Just wanted to offer a bit of reassurance really there on the role that the LEP's played. So, we've used our convening role through the SELEP Housing and Developers Group to take both local authority planners and developers into our regular calls with the department. And part of those conversations has been around making the case for increased planning fees, specific with the proviso that these are specifically ring-fenced to invest in local authority planning services. I think it's particularly powerful that we can sort of bring that conversation to them, supported by developers as well. And we've made that argument, we'll continue to make it. It's just really important, given the conversations that we continue to have.
Thank you. And Mark, I see.
Being inspired to use my digital hand today. On planning, I mean, it's a perennial issue, isn't it? And it would be really helpful if we could decouple. I've yet to have a conversation about planning with politicians that doesn't end up in a conversation, mostly an argument about housing. And we almost need to decouple the two. Actually planning for economic growth. Yes, we need housing. I mean, I'll put my real hand up. We need more housing. Absolutely, we do. But it's the conversations just get stalled, and things like duty to cooperate and all that sort of stuff. I was in a really interesting meeting with the mayor of the West Midlands last week, and he said he doesn't need more powers. He just needs, and he's done it in West Midlands, is getting the local authorities working with each other so that we've all got a shared goal. I think if we can solve that, that might help, and recognise that if we don't get the planning system right, economic growth won't happen.
Thank you. Actually, whilst we're talking to you, Mark, there was a question I know that you've answered a little bit, but actually I thought it was such a good question that I wanted us to all talk about it a bit, which is a question from Perry Gladding, which says, as the countries of the world focus very much on being self-sufficient in areas, particularly for energy and food, how does the CBI feel that this strategy will affect government policy and inward investment over the coming years? But maybe it's not just a question for the CBI to answer. That might be something other people would like to contribute to. But Mark, can I turn to you first on that one?
Yeah, sure. Well, I did put an answer in that actually, but I think from what we've seen so far, the government certainly seems to be saying the right things about being pro-trade and pro-growth, and obviously given Liz Truss's background in DIT, I would hope that stays very much at the top of the agenda. I think in terms of how can we exploit the intellectual capacity and properties across the UK? How do we make the UK the place to come and invest as a foreign investor? Because it doesn't quite feel like it is at the moment. And I think if we can get that sorted, I'll come back to the points I made in my slide about stability and uncertainty. If we can get that bit right, I think there is a huge opportunity to attract inward investment. create opportunities that we can export around the world. And the classic one is decarbonisation and net zero. That's a challenge the whole world is having to deal with, and I think we could be at the forefront of that, driving investment here in the UK and exporting it around the world. I would hope that stays right at the top of the government agenda.
Thank you. And so then, sort of, when we're talking about international trade, and maybe this is sort of one a bit for Martin, but also others, which is about reducing friction at international gateways. That might not be all of your area expertise, but through political technical solutions. I wondered whether you had any particular thoughts about some of that. And I note that, Mark, you kind of said we absolutely need, that's something we need to absolutely address.
As Sarah, I think there's no question that there are significant opportunities for the use of technology in trade. The question is the government's preparedness to use it. So we've been, not surprisingly, through Dubai. They are operating some of those technologies and have been operating them for some period. So they work, and they work in other parts of the world. The conversations with HMRC are always exceptionally challenging. Indeed, those of us that have been involved with trying to implement custom zones in the Freeport have experienced that, frankly, the levels of incentive of a custom zone in a Freeport is only marginally different from those that are available in any case. And on the ground, operationally, there's a lot of interest in the height of your security gate and the strength of the bars on your window, but that's not doing very much in terms of capitalizing on a position. So we find ourselves in fortnightly meetings with HMRC trying to find new ways through this. So it's not through lack of effort, but I think there's just an enormous opportunity for us to strengthen the whole position, and we hope that in the light of what the government's got to say, and reflecting on what Mark just offered now, that we'll have a different tone to that conversation moving forward.
Thank you. And I certainly know that it's something that, as a region that's got the busiest port, with Dover as well, it's something we're very, very mindful of, and we have seen the impact of congested ports on our businesses in a really significant way. So talking of the challenges of congestion, there is a question, Matt, about, is the solution of the tunnel enough? Should there be more?
Yeah, I saw that question, and then should there be a second as well? So let's talk about the tunnel, and then we'll talk about whether there should be a second. So government forecasts traffic growth based on population statistics and forecasts going forward. Currently, our projection, if you take the one with plan to build, which is it's 3 lanes in each direction, 70 kilometers an hour through the tunnel. So it's significantly bigger than most tunnels, certainly bigger than the existing Dartford crossing tunnels. And because it's running at 70 miles an hour, it takes incrementally more traffic through it. That will last, on a very, very high growth scenario, will last 15 years. The reality is government's just reforecast its numbers in terms of population growth and therefore traffic growth. And we're just going back round. It will last significantly longer than 15 years is the reality from opening. So that sort of takes us from, up to the mid-40s to probably well beyond the 2050s. I think that is a bit of an old paradigm, though, because what we are seeing is a massive change in traffic. We're seeing the under 29-year-olds basically not making the same number of journeys as the previous generation. So we're seeing a massive drop in journeys in terms of car journeys. And we're seeing incremental, slow, steady growth of HGVs. And investment in rail although significant at the moment, will not dent the HGV movements on the motorways. So over time, what you'll see is actually the SRN, the strategic road network, becoming more and more freight focused with less passenger growth, less car growth, which means that probably what I've just told you in terms of the tunnel, it will be longer. That said, do we need another one? And should we start it? This one's already taken 10 years to get to where we are now, and it will take us another 10 years to basically build it, or there or thereabouts. We should be, infrastructure takes time. Our planning regime is difficult in this country to get them started. I personally think that actually, sort of automation of vehicles, etc., will probably mean that the paradigms I've just described in terms of traffic growth that we're already modelling are again wrong. And what you can start to see, sort of 2050 beyond, is actually fully automated vehicles are able to run much closer together on motorways. Therefore, you need less vehicles. The thing that people don't know is actually National Highways was doing some of the piloting through COVID. It was a great time for us to run up and down the M5, 5 trucks at a metre apart. No one noticed, which was quite useful. But so the reality is we're on the cusp of that change. It will take time before it becomes in massively. So I do think the paradigm of traffic growth that we're seeing that has blighted the Southeast will slow down, and eventually technology will drive it such. So my view is probably we're building big enough now, but we have to just keep an eye on it. And actually, I do think technology over time will mean that you won't need another crossing to the east. Eventually we'll end up sort of flatlining because our population can't keep on growing as it has been growing. And there must come a point where actually the Southeast, the level of housing we're putting in, etc., will come to a slow, but sure grinding halt at some point. So that's a bit of a long answer, Sarah.
No, really good to hear. Thank you. There was one other sort of larger question I wanted to ask the panel, but I'm going to start with Mark just to warn you who I'm going to ask first, which is about, if we think we're living in unprecedented times and the pace of change is accelerating so much, what do you think might be the kind of hidden costs, the hidden unintended consequences that we need to be really mindful of as we plan our responses to these really changing circumstances?
Oh, blimey, where to start with that? That's a question and a half.
Yeah.
I'll do the political thing and answer the question by kind of half not answering it and answering my own question. I think the thing that does concern me, and has done for a while, is if I was in charge, I would put all the money into education. And obviously quite a lot in infrastructure, but mostly in education. And I think we can't grow the economy without the right skills. And actually, we need the right skills to be current, and we need the right skills system and delivery mechanisms to be responsive to the needs of business, which is why I'm supportive of LSIPs. I think, we need collaboration has been mentioned lots of times. I think in skills, it's never been more important. We need businesses articulating what they need and helping colleges and training providers to put the courses together to make sure we've got the skilled workforce we need for the future. That's, and I could talk all day about this, but I won't. I'll stop there. That would be my biggest thing. I just think we're not putting enough money into education. The drop in fees per student at FE level is worryingly small. As in, we just don't pay enough for FE. I think we need to pay more for college learning. I'll park there and let others come in if that's okay.
Thank you. Martin, did you have any thoughts on that one?
I do. I'm not sure. So I'm not sure I completely agree with Mark. So there's huge amounts of money in the skills system. The question is whether it's being used in the right way and whether we have enough influence over the way it's used. And I don't think that that's true. So I think the skills system is just a great example of a whole series of siloed interventions that aren't joined up, and it's left to local places to try and make sense of it. And that's often quite hard because we don't have enough levers to influence it still. So that's one thing I would say. The second is I completely agree with Mark that businesses, frankly, have not been good enough at describing what their future requirements are. So by their own admission in the Freeport, I speak for the Freeport, I can't speak for other places, but by their own admission, the major businesses in the Freeport area have recognized that they need to do more in describing what their requirements are, and therefore creating profiles that allow the HE and FE providers to respond in a way that they haven't been able to do so far. So there's definitely something much more to be done by employers. And I think also there's something about the way in which we lean into communities, especially those that have not had success in the past in taking advantage of some of the opportunities that have been created. I think we need to join up our activity in a much more effective way, because we've got lots of people talking to schools and colleges and communities, but there are lots of individual conversations, and there's scope for us to be much stronger in the way we join that up. But also, I think we need to change the nature of the conversation and the type of people who are involved in the conversation, because typically it's people like us who aren't recognizable in those communities. So we don't create credibility about the opportunities. So I think that there's something much more to be done about the way we think about that engagement. And if we do those two things together, that will allow HE providers and FE providers to operate in a much more strategic and aligned way with business than they do now.
Thank you. Jonathan, I'm very conscious of time, and I do need to hand over to Chris in a minute, but was there any last word you wanted to say on that one?
Yeah, I'll keep it short and sweet. Probably what would be nice would be consistency as far as growth landscape policy is, not shifting about. Certainty over funding for sub-regional infrastructure and allowing fiscal devolution to allow patient long-term capital investments, which is self-sustaining. And finally, going back to the point about relationships and the social supply side, yes, no, better channels of communication between parts of government responsible for growth and businesses, which SELEP is a great catalyst for better dialogue and conversation. And really, just ensuring that, it was mentioned earlier, that the fruits of growth are reaching communities at all levels, so that everyone has a stake in what we're seeking to create here, which is prosperity, economic, social, and community.
Thank you, Jonathan. That's a brilliant summation. So what more can I say? But I'm going to ask Chris Chris, who's the chair of the South East Local Enterprise Partnership, who will give us a few closing remarks and his reflections on today's discussion just before I come back to me and hand it over to close today. But thank you all for your incredible comments, for your really useful insights. I hope this is just the beginning of a much longer conversation. I feel like we could be continuing the Q&A, but there's never enough time for Q&As, are there? But thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to everyone for attending this event today. I'm sure you'll all agree that it's been really insightful and educational. I've certainly learned a lot this morning from our speakers, so thank you very much to our fantastic speakers. There have been some excellent contributions and some real insights as to what growth, as our Prime Minister said, really means in real terms. So thank you for that. The next steps for our organisation are really important. We need to carefully consider the issues raised today, not just in our future activity, but through our working groups, influencing future investment decisions, and in the wider work we do to benefit communities across the South East. The South East LEP is well placed to help coordinate and bring people together, as we have seen through our activities, such as in our major projects group, and the success of our working groups, such as the South East Creative Economy Network and the work we have done with the Arts Council. We have a unique role to play in convening partners and in champion economic growth through initiatives through our advocacy and by engaging business and industry and in supporting specific projects. This event has provided an excellent forum for businesses and our Southeast partner organizations to hear about our real economy, the needs of business, as well as providing insight into what we can do collectively to support our future growth sectors. I'd like to take a moment to reflect on the work of the LEP, as this will be my last annual conference in the role of LEP Chair after 7 years. I have many highlights in my time, especially visiting key projects as part of our capital program, many photo opportunities in high-vis vests and hard hats, but particularly meeting with partners and businesses and hearing of their real-time experiences. The scale of hard work and commitment in the region is notable, and there are some real examples of transformative projects and programs which will make a real difference to our future generations and how our economy will look. I'm grateful to have been a part of all of these moments and wish you all the best for the future. I would like to extend my greatest thanks to my colleagues on the Strategic Board and to my Deputy Chair, Sarah Dance, for their commitment and unfailing determination to work together and improve the Southeast for all its residents. I would also like to thank the Secretariat, ably led by Adam Bryan, who not only have supported me so well over the last 7 years, but have also worked tirelessly and professionally during this extraordinary period for our country. Our economy is evolving, and we are too. Our evolving role will see evidence and intelligence-led strategic direction, a strong and comprehensive network, and high-quality delivery at its core as we move forward to deliver a highly connected, highly skilled, high-performing local economy. Thank you all for your time and continued support. Sarah.
Thank you, Chris. And I would just like to personally thank you so much for all that you have done for the partnership. You have been absolutely superb in the way that you've guided us. You've guided us to lead into some fantastic successes. You know, we've secured record levels of investment for the local growth programme, for the Getting Building funds. And you've also helped guide us through some really significant and challenging times. So from the bottom of my heart, and I'm sure from all of us, thank you for all that you have done. You will be, I know, really, really sorely missed. So this brings us to the end of the conference. Thank you to you all for attending. Thank you for all the Q&As that you have put up. We will try to get to answer all of them if we can. And the recording of the conference will be added to the website and onto the YouTube channel. Please do sign up to our newsletter if you haven't already, and follow us on Twitter and on LinkedIn to keep up to date with our work. And the SELEP AGM follows this meeting, which is now being shared on the screen. So do join us if you can. It will be great to see you. But without further ado, thank you to all of our speakers. Thank you to all of you for attending. I hope you found it a really insightful and useful conference. I know I have. Thank you and goodbye.